Hidden revenge script, family conflict. Structure, family conflict. Escalation, public event, shocking consequence. Protagonist, female-facing family injustice. Style, first-person narrative, dramatic tone. Hidden revenge. Block 1. Introduction of family conflict. Introduce the protagonist and establish the family conflict, favoritism, exclusion, etc. The bitter scent of coffee hung heavy in the air, mingling with the tension that permeated the somber office where we all awaited what might be the end of a chapter, and at the same time, the prelude to a battle. My heart pounded unevenly as I watched my brother Charles shift restlessly in his chair. He also seemed anxious, but the disdain in his gaze betrayed the truth I dreaded. Beside me, my sister Anna sat remarkably relaxed, a smug smile playing on her lips as if she already knew what was to come. I knew the power was in her hands, and it consumed me. From a young age, I learned that my worth in the family was always measured against Anna. The favorite, the talented, the labels that perpetually clung to her seemed to scream at me, making me feel like a shadow in our own home. The echoes of laughter and celebrations surrounding her resonated in my mind like a tragically familiar mantra. "You'll never be like your sister." My father's words replayed on a cruel loop in my memory. My soul bled with every compliment Anna received, while I was relegated to the role of a spectator. The reading of the will began, and as I heard the lawyer utter the first words, I felt the air grow thick and almost unbearable. To my daughter Anna, I leave the estate and control of the family legacy. In that instant, the world around me dissolved. The words crashed like waves against rocks, shattering my hopes and leaving me adrift. A shockwave coursed through my body as the voices around me faded into a distant murmur. The chill of despair began to invade my chest, freezing any impulse to fight back. Then, it happened. Anna, with a triumphant glint in her eyes, turned to me and sneered, "You always knew you were the second fiddle, didn't you, Maria?" In that moment, I could have crumbled under my own fragility, but a burgeoning rage began to boil within me. "Why do you care? You were nothing to them," she continued, laughing at my open wounds. As her words struck me like daggers, I gritted my teeth, determined not to let her taunts bring me down. In that dark moment, the inner voice I had suppressed began to rise. In the end, it's the hidden truths that shape our true inheritances. This phrase resonated like a banner of self-worth. Each word Anna uttered wasn't a defeat. It was a reminder that I carried within me an untapped strength. I had the power to alter the narrative imposed on me by the toxic family dynamic that had always prevailed. I looked back at Anna. Her triumphant pose exposed a fragility she didn't seem to recognize. The image of the perfect sister was cracking under the strain of expectation. I decided this was the moment. I am not just Anna's shadow, I thought, as a growing determination began to form within me. Revenge and recognition intertwined in my heart, and I knew that to end this humiliation, I would need to do more than simply accept the imposed reality. Charles's contemptuous glances and Anna's arrogant smile awakened a strength I always knew existed. Amidst the humiliation, a certainty emerged. The fight for my recognition was only just beginning. The will to confront the truth, to rewrite my family history, and to prove my worth grew with each beat of my heart. Here in this dark office, amidst the pain and anger, I finally realized that the true inheritance I desired was the strength to embrace my own identity and eventually expose the lies that degraded the image of what it truly meant to be part of that family. And now, the battle was brewing within me, waiting only for the opportunity to be unleashed. I would no longer be a spectator. It was time to become the protagonist of my own life. Hidden Revenge Block 2. Development of Injustice. Deepen the injustice suffered. Show examples of favoritism/exclusion. Anna's words still echoed in my mind as I tried to regain my focus. But the memories of the injustices I had suffered swelled like a maelstrom, refusing to leave me in peace. Every humiliation, every scornful glance, every silent scream trapped in my throat caused the anguish to grow like a monster within me. It was like a slow, steady poison that corroded my self-image and suffocated me in an environment that should have been safe. I remember dark moments from my childhood that still haunt me. At a birthday party, when I was just a child, my father seemed utterly charmed to say to Anna loudly, "You've always been our little star, haven't you?" I stood beside her, a shadow trying to slip into the penumbra. In that instant, his words cut me like a knife. Nothing I ever did would ever measure up. Anna smiled, graceful as ever, while my heart broke into invisible pieces. The pain of being overlooked was a constant, foreshadowing, like an echo, a life in the shadows. I just wanted to be acknowledged, but life in the Almeida family home consigned me to a state of invisibility that had become painfully habitual. Days blurred into a whirlwind of emotions, the pressure of forced acceptance intensifying. Gradually, my parents' dismissive glances became a constant in my life. No matter how hard I tried to be strong, the daily routine of being treated as a second-class citizen made the mask of acceptance unbearable. One afternoon, rummaging through an old box of forgotten keepsakes, I stumbled upon old family photos. There was Anna, always radiant and confident, clutching glittering trophies. In contrast, I was in the background, a mere detail in the pictures, the invisible sister. A profound sadness washed over me, and I couldn't stop the hot tears streaming down my face. Why am I always the forgotten sister? The question echoed in my heart. The day of the event loomed closer than I expected. With each sunrise, adrenaline and anticipation mingled with anxiety, creating a storm of emotions that left me restless. That morning, as I prepared, I hoped the mirror would reflect not only my image, but the confidence I so desperately sought. I stared closely at myself, delving into the eyes that reflected not only uncertainties, but a growing determination. "You are stronger than you think, Maria," I whispered to myself, the words reverberating in my heart. The event at the art gallery was more than a simple presentation. It was the defining moment of who I truly was. The thought of the room filled with people, all of them cultivating an image of my sister Anna as an icon, made me uneasy. But I knew that behind this image there was a story yet untold, mine. When I arrived at the venue, I was immediately enveloped by the vibrant atmosphere, but insecurity began whispering in my ears again. The bright lights reflected the enthusiasm, but I could barely breathe. Voices resonated around me, and Anna's imposing presence was always a few inches from me, like a shadow cast in my own space. Seeing her gliding among the guests, with her unwavering confidence, my stomach churned. I remembered her many accomplishments, how she was always lauded by family elders, and how their love and attention seemed eternally directed towards her. "Look at you, always so understated," she'd comment from time to time during family dinners, as if it were a compliment or a way to encourage me to be more like her. In that moment, the anger I had so carefully stored over the years began to flow like a raging river, flooding my mind. But what if I decide to be myself? I thought, an inner call that sounded like a hymn of freedom. The moment of clarity I had longed for began to shine in my mind like a distant star. I no longer needed my parents' validation or the outcome of Anna's choices. If I wanted to shine, it was my light that needed to overshadow the darkness, my own path to follow. With that, a crucial decision began to form within me. I wouldn't just present my work, I would exhibit it as part of my story, the struggle I carry within me to exist and be heard. In that instant, everything became clearer. It was as if I were awakening from a long emotional coma, and a new strength was blossoming within me. "This is it, Maria. This is your time," I murmured as I ran my hands over the creations I had molded with such care. Each piece told a story, carried the identity that I could finally share. A strong line of determination transformed into an invisible cord connecting my heart to my mind. Night fell, and the room was in a frenzy. Voices filled the space, mixed with laughter and applause that reverberated through the air. Anna was being lauded, like the sun at its zenith. She shone, and for a second, I felt the old desire for approval. But that feeling was quickly replaced by a more revitalizing one: anger and self-love. The freedom of finally asserting myself began to fill the space in my heart that had been empty for so long. I had secretly prepared my short presentation. When my turn came before the crowd, my heart leaped, but I held firm. The curious eyes of the guests fixed on me, and soon the lack of confidence made its last appearance, almost making me falter. But I took a deep breath and remembered the fire burning within me. Hello, everyone. Today, in addition to celebrating Anna's new collection, I'm grateful for the opportunity to also present my creations, I began, and the silence caused the eyes to shift between me and Anna. Murmurs indicated a certain disbelief, a hidden expectation in the air. This isn't just a space for one name, but a space where every voice deserves to be heard. Anna's eyes gleamed with a mixture of disdain and surprise, while the murmurs of disapproval and surprise began to grow in intensity. The ceramics, I continued, are more than a hobby for me. They represent my journey. Each piece you see here carries a part of my story, the pains I faced, and the strength I gained along the way. The room fell silent, and a wave of empowerment began to flow through me. There was no turning back. I had to move forward. The pieces became visible, and I highlighted them with pride. One represented my struggle against the shadows formed by exclusion, while another was a tribute to the woman I was becoming. These works are not just impressions of clay, but affirmations of my right to exist and be heard, not just as Anna's sister, but as Maria, I declared passionately. The atmosphere in the room began to change. What had been disbelief transformed into an aura of contemplation and respect. Applause began to erupt like waves of a turbulent sea, and I realized that, finally, I was being seen. Each clap transformed into fuel that further fueled the flame of my courage. Anna approached, her expression a mixture of confusion and, perhaps, a touch of admiration. I had succeeded. It didn't matter if my journey wouldn't be the same as hers. What mattered was that I was occupying my space, asserting my story. As positive energy spread through the room, the invisible walls that imprisoned me began to crumble. The night was a revelation not only for me but for everyone present. Looking at the audience, I realized that I had revealed not only my works, but a new part of myself that was ready to embrace freedom. I'm ready to change the narrative of my story and step out of the shadows. This night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The journey of being who I truly am, and the freedom that comes with it, was finally within my reach. Hidden Revenge. Block 5. Building the Overcoming Revenge. The protagonist silently works on her transformation. The launch night was a milestone that would change not only my family's perception of me, but also my perception of myself. The sequence of applause echoed in my ears like music, a hymn to the freedom I had finally found. However, while the light still shone on the pieces I had created, my heart was stirred with a new goal. Not only to overcome the invisibility that had accompanied me for so many years, but also to confront the toxic dynamics that sustained my family. In the days following the event, something shifted within me. The energy that had surrounded me in the gallery continued to burn, fueling every fiber of my being. I was determined to channel this force into something productive and transformative. I began working day and night on new pieces, exploring themes that reflected not only my personal struggle, but also the struggle of all women who have felt the pain of oppression. I connected with a group of women artists and began to form meaningful bonds. Together we shared stories, and each account brought to the surface emotions that resonated deeply within my heart. The mutual support was a balm to the wounds we carried. I was no longer alone. I had finally found a community that understood and valued what each of us had to offer. I was building my own network of strength and inspiration, a new dynamic that stood in stark contrast to what I had experienced in my family. You're amazing, Maria. Your next collection will be a huge success. Think of how many women you can touch with your art, one of my new friends said as we talked, her encouraging smile filling the room. And it was true. The ability to touch lives was a new concept I now cherished. I felt a stronger, deeper purpose, as if everything I had gone through had finally justified itself to bring me to this point of transformation. At the same pace, I began to experiment with more ceramic techniques I had never tried before, bolder sculptures, pieces that challenged traditional forms. The clay, which once represented only pain, was now shaping courage. My studio transformed into a sanctuary. With each new piece emerging from the kiln, I felt a piece of my past dissolving. The transformation I experienced wasn't merely artistic, it was an internal reformation. The empowerment I felt seeing my work expand was reflected in my posture, in how I experienced my life. However, the family dynamic still loomed over me like a shadow. The idea that my family might still see me as the forgotten sister haunted me. Although I was moving in a new direction, the need to confront my family became more urgent each day. Deep down, I knew I needed to confront Anna, my parents, and their misconception of me before this new identity could fully take root. One day, while engrossed in my work, the phone rang. It was my mother. "Dear, we'd like to invite you to dinner at home. It's a family celebration. It would be good to have you here." The invitation seemed genuine, but I knew that behind it were the echoes of comparisons and judgment. What I truly wanted was to go and show them how much I had evolved, but I also wanted them to see the real Maria, not just the quiet one, but a woman who had found her voice and had a story to tell. "Thank you, Mom. I'd love to come, but first I'd like you all to see something I've been working on," I replied, feeling my nervousness rise. I wasn't just about to present my new works. I was contemplating how risky it would be to face these people who had silenced me for so long. What if they didn't accept my transformation? More than that, what if they didn't want to understand? The dinner approached, and with each passing moment, I prepared myself to be vulnerable, but also strong. The pieces I had made represented not only freedom, but the struggle to assert oneself. Therefore, I should present this to them. I needed to make sure my story wouldn't just be a version of the truth that fit their expectations. It was my chance to finally make it clear that who I was would no longer be overshadowed. On the day of the dinner, I wore a dress I had designed and sewn myself. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see an insecure girl, but a strong and determined woman. Emotions were running high as I arrived at the house where I had spent my whole life living in comparison. As I entered, the room was filled with cheerful glances, mixed with well-intentioned smiles. But deep down, I felt that the expected fervor for getting to know my new identity wasn't there yet. My family's gazes seemed superficial, ignoring what I really wanted to show. As the meal began, I saw Anna's expression brighten as everyone praised her recent inventions. The pain of neglect flared up in me again, but I didn't let myself sink into that feeling. When the conversation turned to the pieces I had created, I knew it was my moment. It was time to establish my presence. "I'd like to share something I've been working on recently," I declared, my voice sounding stronger than I imagined, cutting through the surrounding chatter. I felt the tension and expectation in the room, and the conversation stopped instantly. I stepped out of the shadow role I had always occupied and began to describe my pieces with passion, each one symbolizing the stages of my journey. These works represent all the women who feel invisible, and I carried the pain and struggle of never being seen in all of them, I shared, watching my family's expressions shift from confusion to a mixture of recognition and desolation. Anna remained silent, her eyes widening as she realized the conversation wasn't about her, but about me. The atmosphere was thick, but I continued to speak, my voice firm and clear. "These sculptures are more than clay. They are proof that, even in a family where you always felt like a shadow, You can find your own path. I'm not just Anna's sister. I'm Maria, and that should be enough. My mother's expression was a mixture of shock and pride, as if she could finally see beyond the image she had constructed. The tension of the dynamic that kept us apart slowly evaporated. Conscious of the subtext, I looked from Anna to my father, seeing how their perceptions were beginning to shift. In that moment, light began to penetrate the darkness that enveloped us. And so, at this dinner that was supposed to be a celebration, an invitation to a new freedom was made, where this house would no longer be a symbol of exclusion, but a new beginning, a newly updated space for us to finally be ourselves. My journey to get here wasn't just shaping me into an artist, but into a woman with a powerful and clear voice, ready to be heard. The beginning of the transformation was finally taking shape, and our family, like me, would begin to learn to be the most authentic version of themselves. Hidden Revenge Block 6. Climax. Public family event. Dramatic revelation at a family event. Shocked family reaction. That night's dinner was more than just a family gathering. For me, it was a new chance to redefine what it meant to be seen and heard. The hours since arriving at the house had been filled with anxiety, but as I looked around and saw the intent faces turned toward me, a new desire took hold. I needed to expose the whole truth. Tonight isn't just a dinner. It's about revelations, and more importantly, it's about me, I thought, as the conversation and smiles swirled around me. Anna was there, radiant, once again the center of attention, as always. But this time, I didn't let that image make me feel inferior. The night was becoming the eve of a climax I had silently awaited for so long. The discussions about Anna's accomplishments began to feel repetitive. I felt impatience rising within me. This is it, I repeated in my mind, bracing myself for what was about to happen. I began to wonder, would this be the best opportunity to finally expose my truth? Maria, would you mind making a toast? My mother asked, breaking the pleasant reception mood. The voices began to quiet as I slowly raised my glass, my gaze fixed on a table surrounded by faces that didn't truly see me. With a pounding heart and a lump in my throat, I gathered my courage. I'd like to share something important with all of you, I said, my voice tense but firm. A ripple of murmurs went through the room, and I saw Anna's expression change. The uncertainty in her eyes challenged the confidence she had always been given. What she didn't know was that my time in the shadows was about to end. Today, I'm here to talk about the invisible women, those who live among us and whose voices remain muted. I, too, am one of those women, I confessed, letting the first part of my truth slip out, as I felt a growing warmth inject life into my words. A warmth that touched every corner of the room, bringing the attention I had longed for. A heavy silence settled, and my mother's look of shock showed she wasn't ready for this. I spent years living as the younger sister, the forgotten one, always in the background of Anna's victories. But today, I am no longer a mere shadow. I am not just the unassuming one, as you always refer to me, Anna, I said, pointing to her, as I felt the weight of my words beginning to become a weight in my hands, a weapon against what had oppressed me. The people at the table exchanged glances of uncertainty. The lump in my throat became a vibrant cry that resonated through me. You can do this, Maria. This is your moment, the encouraging voice repeated in my mind. My sculptures aren't just clay. Each one carries the pain I felt for being invisible. They represent women like me, who struggle in silence and who also deserve recognition, I declared, passion overflowing in every word. The air became thick again, charged with tension and emotion. The silence was filled with hesitant murmurs as reality began to unfold. Anna's look was a mixture of anger and confusion, as if she were trying to process that the room was no longer turned toward her. I followed her rhythm perfectly, my determination fueling my words. I want you all to understand that while she's a brilliant artist, I am also a strong, accomplished woman of value. I am not her shadow or a supporting character. My voice grew stronger, and confidence flowed over me like a cloak. My family's reactions shifted from confusion to a slow recognition. I saw my father frown, while my mother looked at me with teary eyes. What seemed impossible was slowly coming to pass. My desire for a peace was transforming into a moment of collective truth. I have finally taken responsibility and the courage to show myself as I am, and above all, as I want to be treated. This reality is the struggle for self-worth that we all must embrace, I declared. The feeling of liberation that flowed through me was unparalleled. It was as if a door opened within me, and the energy in the room shifted. My voice was echoing, not just as my expression, but a representation of all women who are constantly relegated to silence. What I want for this dinner is for each of you to consider the journey of those beside you and those who may not be seen. We see a person, but perhaps we don't recognize who they truly are, I said, looking directly at Anna. The shock in her expression was almost tangible. My intention wasn't just to expose the truth about the tension between us, but to reset the dynamic. The voices of the past couldn't define this new way of being a family. A growing murmur filled the room, and I knew there was no turning back. This was a transformation that affected not only me, but everyone present. I might not have expected overwhelming support, but the fact that I no longer needed to remain hidden was liberating enough. Anna, you may have your spotlight, but today I bring my own. I hope we can share our truth, and that now, all voices in our family can be heard equally, I concluded, feeling that I was not only claiming my space, but also building bridges of empathy between us. Soft applause began, hesitant at first, but soon no one could ignore what had just happened. The expressions in the room began to shed their veils of confusion, and slowly the vision of who I had become began to dictate a new future. Deep down, I realized that the path to truth always demands courage. The transformation I had longed for was taking shape, and each member of my family was beginning to see not just the artist, but the woman who, for the first time, stood up with pride. In an event that should have been just a celebratory party, a new era was forming. What began as a confrontation transformed into a dialogue, and I knew the real battle for acceptance was yet to come. There, amidst the applause and surprised reactions, I finally emerged. The journey of self-affirmation was becoming a continuous construction, and the more space I created for my truth, the more the family dynamic would recover its brief lapses of empathy. This was a victory not only for me, but for truth itself. The revealing night served as a watershed moment, the moment I would cease to be a shadow and begin to shine. Hidden revenge block. 7. Resolution and consequences. Consequences for antagonists. Protagonist validation. Moral lesson. After that night's revelation, a new phase began to unfold in our family dynamic. The atmosphere in the Almeida house was clearly changing. What had once been a space filled with competition and tension now began to open up to a more honest and loving dialogue. In the days following the dinner, my mother approached me and asked to talk. I felt a mixture of apprehension and hope. What would she say? To my surprise, her words were validating. Maria, I never realized how suffocated you were. That wasn't my intention. I'm here to learn and support you, she said, her eyes shining with a sincerity that dried up the insecurities I held. Anna, a week later, approached me. I'm sorry, Maria. I really didn't realize what you were going through. I want you to know that I want to support you in your art and this new phase of your life. Hearing this, a mixture of relief and skepticism welled up in me. For a long time, the rivalry between us had deep roots, but in that conversation, I felt a gradual blossoming of empathy. The conversations with my family showed me that the dynamics weren't just about competitiveness, but about the need for understanding and forgiveness. The voices of the past that had dictated who I should be were transforming into a new narrative, one where Anna and I could support each other. Over time, Anna started attending some of my exhibitions, She brought friends, and so our lives, once separated by competition, united through mutual support and celebrations. What impressed me most was seeing my father smile, really smile, while watching me exhibit my art. I had longed for simple acknowledgement, but now it was a reception full of love and pride. During an art event in which I participated, where I showcased a new collection called Freedom in Sculptures, the transformation was complete. My father stood up before I even began, and with a sincere smile said, "I'm incredibly proud of your courage to show us who you truly are." He applauded before I even opened my mouth. The applause echoed around the room, not just for what I had created, but for what they had finally begun to perceive in me. On that occasion, looking out at the audience full of interested people, I realized it wasn't just about recognition, it was about the collective struggle for acceptance that all women face. The women in the room were inspired by my experiences, and I knew my story could resonate with many others. The truth that emerges from struggle always demands courage, and I learned that this struggle and validation were an indelible part of my growth. The pieces were not only testaments to my journey, but also symbolized the fight against the invisibility we face. The love and support now present were part of the new family legacy. At the end of that exhibition night, Anna came to find me, a gleam in her eyes. "You've really transformed into something beautiful, Maria. I admire your strength, and I hope we can create even more together." Her sincerity was like a breath of fresh air, extinguishing the last embers of rivalry. What had once been a minefield of misunderstandings now became fertile ground for a healthier relationship. What could I learn from this whole journey? The most important lesson was that true legacy isn't just about who shines brightest, but about the ability to include each other in the story. I learned that love must be a daily choice, a constant dialogue, and that strength lies in unity. So, the dynamic that once fostered exclusion had finally been redefined. Instead of competing, Anna and I were now allies. The transformation I experienced wasn't limited to me, but extended to everyone who was ready to grow together. "So, what's our next move?" I asked Anna, a genuine smile playing on my lips as we locked eyes, conscious of the journey we'd traveled. "We need to keep raising our voices and the voices of other women," she replied. "I admire your strength, and I hope we can create even more together." Her sincerity was like a breath of fresh air, extinguishing the last embers of rivalry. What had once been a minefield of misunderstandings now became fertile ground for a healthier relationship. What could I learn from this whole journey? The most important lesson was that true legacy isn't just about who shines brightest, but about the ability to include each other in the story. I learned that love must be a daily choice, a constant dialogue, and that strength lies in unity. So the dynamic that once fostered exclusion had finally been redefined. Instead of competing, Anna and I were now allies. The transformation I experienced wasn't limited to me, but extended to everyone who was ready to grow together. "So, what's our next move?" I asked Anna, a genuine smile playing on my lips as we locked eyes, conscious of the journey we'd traveled. "We need to keep raising our voices and the voices of other women," she replied.